It's Monday, the 12th of July, 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. The economic and financial impact of the surge of COVID cases in New South Wales hits the share market as Sydney faces a prolonged lockdown. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, Wall Street hits record highs as confidence returns to the biggest economy in the world. House prices across the country benefit from a COVID premium, and Uber drivers and Airbnb providers attract close tax office scrutiny. Then stay listening for my chat with financial commentator Peter Switzer about how to make money in the share market. But first, here's a brief look at markets. All three major indices on Wall Street closed at record highs over the weekend. The fears about the latest wave of the Delta variant of coronavirus were swamped by optimism about the upcoming earnings season that starts this week. The S&P 500 finished up 1.1%. The Nasdaq Composite rose 1% and the Dow Jones was 0.2% higher. The optimism flowed through to bond markets, with the yield on the 10-year US Treasury note jumping from 1.25% last week to 1.36%. People buy bonds when they're worried about the economic outlook because they're ultra-safe investments. Higher demand pushes up the price, that's natural, which means the yield on the fixed interest rate investment falls. So, when yields go up, it implies investors have a greater tolerance for risk and are more confident about the outlook. It's all a bit complicated, but bond yields up means investors are more confident. European markets were much stronger also, with London's FTSE and the Europe Stoxx 600 both finishing up 1.3%. The local share market fell 0.9% on Friday to 7,272 points. For the week, the market was down 0.5%, in line with the global sell-off of riskier assets. Oil prices were up over the weekend after figures showed that inventories in the US, the biggest market, had fallen. Overall, the price of Brent crude was down slightly for the week. That's not a bad thing for we car owners, given prices remain at near 3-year highs. Gold is trading back above $1,800 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is at 74.8 US cents. Sydney is heading for a much longer lockdown as the number of new community cases over the weekend surged, with many of them in the community while infectious. Market economists are now warning that the economic impact will be severe, while some stocks on the share market have already fallen as a result of the outbreak. There are cases spreading through apartment blocks, via tradies on work sites, and in new areas of Sydney and beyond. More contract traces from regional areas were being brought in. New South Wales Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kerry Chant said the number of cases in southwestern Sydney were extraordinarily high. A 90-year-old woman died from COVID, the first since the outbreak of the wave that started in Bondi. There are 52 people in hospital, and 15 of those are in intensive care. 5 of them are on ventilators. Premier Gladys Berejiklian warned that today's numbers are likely to be more than 100. Other states are introducing hard borders with New South Wales, including Victoria, which shut its border last night. The health impact of the current wave is severe, and so too is the economic impact. There's a push from federal opposition leader Anthony Albanese for the government to introduce wage subsidies for those put out of work, saying vaccination targets have been missed. He has a point. Over the weekend, the government rolled out a new advertising campaign to try and overcome vaccine hesitancy. Australia's vaccination rate is well below many other developed economies. And last night, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison held a phone hookup with Ms Berejiklian to discuss a joint financial assistance package for the state. AMP Capital's Shane Oliver's economic tracker fell last week before the poor numbers over the weekend, as the lockdown started to bite. Up till now, the lockdown has been costing $1 billion a week. The longer it goes, the more expensive it gets. A new Deloitte Access Economics report shows that it will take Sydney and Melbourne's CBDs 4 years to recover. At the end of last week, the local share market ended lower as fears about the current outbreak escalated. Bank share prices have fallen on concerns of the economic slowdown hitting their earnings. While the strong showing from international markets over the weekend will help the local market today, investors are very worried about how hard the economy will be hit. Banks have started reintroducing home loan deferrals for businesses and home loan customers. Deferrals won't be restricted to borrowers in Sydney, but will be extended nationwide. Last year, home loan deferrals totaled $266 billion across the sector, though in recent months they've fallen back to near zero. And Federal Trade Minister Dan Tehan said the travel bubble with Singapore has been pushed back to at least the end of the year as a result of the most recent COVID outbreak. New South Wales is at a tipping point, and that means the economy is at a tipping point. Every Australian needs to do the right thing, and hopefully the virus can be contained. Hopefully. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, finance officials in the top 20 developed nations have backed a 15% global minimum corporate tax rate to deter big companies like the technology giants shifting earnings to low tax rate countries. Implementation is expected to occur in 2023, but will rely on individual countries doing the right thing. The group of 20 makes up 80% of the world's economy. The officials also warned that the uneven pace of vaccination could hurt the global economic outlook. US President Joe Biden is getting frustrated with cyber attacks out of Russia, and over the weekend called his counterpart, Vladimir Putin, and warned that if Moscow didn't do something about them, the US would start treating them as national security threats. That would lead to far greater repercussions than criminal acts. There's been a string of ransomware attacks recently that's hurt energy and food security in the US. And Sir Richard Branson this morning succeeded in his attempt to complete the world's first private spaceflight, reaching an altitude of 88 kilometres over the New Mexico desert. That's high enough to experience weightlessness and see the curvature of the Earth. In the end, he beat his rival Amazon's Jeff Bezos by about a week. Locally, COVID-19 has triggered the surge in house prices across the country, and Sydney buyers will have to spend $125,000 more to purchase a property, according to modelling from KPMG. The COVID premium in Canberra is $67,000, Brisbane is $60,000, and Melbourne is $35,000, according to a report in the Financial Review. The surge in house prices is a global phenomenon, reflecting lower interest rates around the world as governments support economies. The figures came as some of the heat came out of the Sydney auction market over the weekend, not surprisingly. Gas prices in Victoria have jumped to record levels of more than $58 a gigajoule, about 10 times average, driven by a combination of cold weather, low production, and diminishing stores of reserves. The jump triggered calls for the federal government to open up its domestic gas security mechanism. Prices are so high that some manufacturers might find it more economic to close down factories. In New South Wales, prices are closer to $30 a gigajoule, and they're $20 in Brisbane and Adelaide. Earlier in the year, they were trading in the $5 to $6 range. The big miners keep on keeping on as the price of iron ore remained above $220 a tonne last week. Notwithstanding a slight drop on Friday, BHP is back to its level of 3 months ago, so too Fortescue Metals. Rio Tinto hasn't done quite as well, but it's close to 3-month highs. Despite the rhetoric out of Beijing and talk of Brazil and other producers ramping up supply, there's still plenty of demand for the local stuff. Ride-sharing, food delivery and short-term accommodation platforms, such as Uber and Airbnb, will be part of a new anti-tax avoidance reporting scheme from next year. Providers will have to supply information to the tax office for data matching purposes, according to the Financial Review. Australia's cash economy, much of it illegal, is estimated to be worth $50 billion each year. Job mobility in Australia hit a new low during the COVID pandemic. Just 7.5% of employed people changed their workplace in the 12 months to February 2021, down from 8.1% the previous year. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the trend in job mobility has been down for more than a decade. Managers, professionals and machine operators were the least likely to change jobs last year. Labourers and community and personal service workers were the most likely. The data also shows that in February this year, there were 2.2 million people who were not working but wanted to work, up from 2.1 million a year earlier. That included 800,000 unemployed Australians and 1.4 million people who are not categorised as being in the workforce but wanted a job. Meanwhile, the mining exploration companies have warned that a lack of workers is impeding the sector. Drilling companies and laboratory operators can't find enough people to do the work, and that's been exacerbated by recent discoveries. The Association of Mining Exploration Companies Chief Executive Warren Pearce said it means there's investment dollars going to waste. The four major banks have closed, or plan to close, 350 branches last year and this year as digital banking accelerates and foot traffic falls. ANZ will cut 145 branches, Westpac will be 80, National Australia Bank 72 and Commonwealth Bank 53. With the exception of ANZ, the banks also offer services via Australia Post. Solomon Lew's Premier Investments wants to call an extraordinary meeting of Myer shareholders, and on Friday, Premier asked for a copy of Myer's shareholder register. The announcement to the ASX said, and I quote, "In Premier's view, Myer's 3 remaining non-executive directors should for once put its shareholders first and resign immediately." Premier owns 16% of Myer's shares, and over the weekend, the second largest shareholder, Wilson Asset Management, supported Mr. Lew. Viva Energy has forecast growth in underlying earnings for the first half of 2021 of 34% compared to last year. While the company has suffered from ongoing lower sales of retail and aviation fuels, commercial channels have been stronger. Helping has been government subsidies, and its oil refinery in Geelong operated at break-even levels, in contrast to last year's big losses. Viva shares finished up more than 5% on Friday. And finally, there's an interesting story in the Financial Review this morning about the surge in Australian wool exports to China. Beijing has lifted its quota on duty-free Australian wool imports by 5% to 38,000 tonnes and now accounts for 90% of offshore sales. The next largest market is Italy, which accounts for just 3%. Wool prices are up 65% since their bottom in September last year. Up next is the Daily Interview. Today I'm talking to Peter Switzer, the founder of Switzer Financial Services and one of the most experienced financial commentators around. We talk about how to make money on the stock market, where the opportunities are, whether to use a managed fund, and what Peter looks at when deciding whether a company is a quality investment. Whether you're just getting started or you're an experienced investor, it's a really useful interview. Up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform, or of course at fearandgreed.com.au. And once you're done with that, why not have a listen to our other podcast, Fear and Greed, The Week Ahead. Every Monday, I'm joined by economist Stephen Koukoulas for a look at what's making news in the world of economics this week. Labour force data, business confidence, consumer sentiment, and plenty happening in the US. It's a very big week. And this is everything you need to know about. Fear and Greed, The Week Ahead, out every Monday. It's Monday, the 12th of July, 2021. I'm Sean Elmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.